My sister had the police drag away my 10-year-old daughter in handcuffs over a false accusation. My parents watched and did nothing. What I did next destroyed all their careers. I need to tell this story because keeping it inside has been eating me alive for the past 2 years. What my sister did to my daughter, what my parents allowed to happen, changed everything about who I thought my family was. Some people might say I went too far with my response. Those people didn't watch their 10-year-old child get dragged away in handcuffs while her grandmother stood silently by. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is that I'm a mother first, and I failed to protect my daughter when it counted most. Her name is Olivia, and she just turned 12 last month. She's the kind of kid who volunteers to read to the younger students at school, who saves her allowance to donate to the animal shelter, who cries when she accidentally steps on a bug. The idea that anyone could look at her and see a criminal is so absurd it would be laughable if the consequences hadn't been so devastating. My sister Tessa has always been competitive with me. We're 3 years apart, her being older, and according to our mother, Tessa never quite forgave me for being born and stealing attention away from her. Growing up, she'd hide my homework, tell my friends I'd said cruel things about them, and once even cut up my prom dress the night before the dance. My parents always brushed it off as sibling rivalry. My father would say Tessa just had a strong personality. My mother insisted I was being too sensitive. Tessa married Garrett Walsh when she was 25. He worked in commercial real estate and came from family money. They had 2 kids, Madison and Cole, who are now 13 and 8 respectively. On the surface, Tessa had everything she'd ever wanted: the big house in the gated community, the luxury SUV, the country club membership. But it was never enough. She needed everyone around her to have less so she could feel like she had more. I married later than Tessa, at 30, to a man named Patrick who was a civil engineer. We had Olivia 2 years into our marriage. Patrick died in a construction accident when Olivia was 4. A scaffolding collapse that shouldn't have happened, caused by a contractor cutting corners on safety equipment. The settlement from the lawsuit meant Olivia and I would be financially stable, but no amount of money could replace her father. After Patrick died, my parents suggested I move closer to them. They lived in a suburb outside of Phoenix, in a retirement community that was actually intergenerational. Families lived there too. Tessa and Garrett lived 10 minutes away. The idea of having family support while raising Olivia alone seemed appealing, so I relocated my graphic design business and bought a modest house near my parents. The trouble started almost immediately, though I didn't recognize it as trouble at first. Tessa would make comments about the settlement money, asking if I'd invested it wisely or if I was being smart about Olivia's future. She'd suggest that raising a child alone was too difficult, that perhaps Olivia would benefit from spending more time with her cousins, that maybe she and Garrett could help out more. Looking back, I see she was positioning herself as superior, as the stable family unit that my broken household needed. My parents owned a small chain of dental practices across Arizona, 3 locations that they'd built up over 30 years. My father was the dentist, my mother handled the business side. They employed about 40 people total and had a reputation for good work. They weren't wealthy, but they were comfortable and respected in their professional community. Tessa had gone into pharmaceutical sales after college. She worked for a major company, selling to medical practices and hospitals. She made good money and loved the power dynamics of her job. She once told me that she enjoyed watching doctors beg her for samples. That should have told me something about who she was becoming. The incident happened on a Saturday in June, 2 years ago. My parents were hosting a family barbecue at their house. They had a pool, and the weather was perfect, one of those Arizona days before the real heat sets in, where it's warm but not unbearable. Olivia had been excited all week about swimming with Madison and Cole. We arrived around noon. Tessa and Garrett were already there, and the kids immediately ran off to change into their swimsuits. My mother had made her famous potato salad, and my father was manning the grill. Everything seemed normal. Better than normal, actually. Tessa was being unusually friendly toward me, asking about my work, complimenting my new haircut. The kids swam for about an hour while the adults sat on the patio, drinking iced tea and talking. Madison is a year older than Olivia and had always been a bit bossy, but that day she seemed particularly intent on controlling what games they played. Olivia went along with it, happy just to be included. Cole mostly did his own thing, diving for toys at the bottom of the pool. Around 1:30, my mother called the kids out to eat. They wrapped themselves in towels and came to the patio table, dripping and laughing. We loaded up their plates with hot dogs and chips, and they ate quickly, eager to get back in the water. My father made a joke about them being part fish. Everything was fine. After lunch, the kids wanted to play in the playhouse my father had built in the backyard, a fancy structure with 2 stories, windows, and even a small porch. They'd outgrown it somewhat, but they still enjoyed using it as a fort for their imagination games. The 3 of them disappeared inside while the adults lingered at the table, finishing our own meal. About 20 minutes later, Madison came running out of the playhouse, crying hysterically. Tessa immediately jumped up, and we all rushed over. Madison was sobbing so hard she could barely speak, but between gasps, she said that Olivia had pushed her down the playhouse stairs and that her arm hurt. I hurried into the playhouse where Olivia and Cole were still playing. Olivia looked confused and scared. She said they'd been playing a game where Madison was the queen of the castle, and when Olivia had pretended to invade, Madison had gotten mad and tried to shove her. Olivia had stepped aside, and Madison had lost her balance on her own. Cole nodded, confirming Olivia's version. Outside, Tessa was examining Madison's arm. There was a small red mark, but Madison was moving it freely. My mother brought ice. My father suggested they might want to get it looked at just to be safe, but Tessa said it was probably just bruised. I apologized anyway, even though Olivia insisted she hadn't pushed anyone. I told Olivia to apologize too, just to keep the peace. She did, though she was clearly upset about being blamed for something she didn't do. Madison milked the attention, accepting Olivia's apology with a dramatic sniff. The afternoon continued, though the mood had soured. The kids didn't go back to playing together. Madison stayed close to Tessa, occasionally wincing and clutching her arm when she thought people were watching. Olivia sat quietly beside me, subdued and hurt. We left earlier than planned. That night, Tessa texted me. She said they'd taken Madison to urgent care and that she had a fractured wrist. She included a photo of Madison with her arm in a temporary splint, looking tragic. I felt terrible. I called immediately, apologizing profusely and asking what I could do. Tessa's voice was cold. She said maybe I needed to get Olivia evaluated for anger issues, that pushing children downstairs wasn't normal behavior, that she was concerned about her daughter's safety around Olivia. I was stunned. I told her Olivia had said it was an accident, that Cole had confirmed Madison had lost her balance on her own. Tessa said of course they'd cover for each other, that I was being naive, that my inability to discipline Olivia properly was showing. She hung up on me. Over the next few days, I tried to reach out. I sent flowers to Madison. I offered to cover any medical expenses not handled by insurance. Tessa responded tersely through text, accepting nothing, saying only that Madison was traumatized and having nightmares about being pushed. The following Saturday, Tessa filed a police report claiming Olivia had intentionally assaulted Madison. She included the urgent care records showing the fracture. She gave a statement saying she'd witnessed Olivia push Madison with both hands in an aggressive manner, sending her tumbling down the stairs. This was a complete fabrication. Tessa hadn't even been in the playhouse, but it was her word as an adult against Olivia's word as a child. The police took the report seriously because it involved a minor with a documented injury. A detective called and asked if they could speak with Olivia. I said absolutely not without an attorney present. I immediately hired James Fitzgerald, a defense attorney who specialized in juvenile cases. He advised me not to let Olivia speak to anyone. But that wasn't enough for Tessa. She pushed the district attorney's office to press charges. She claimed Olivia had a pattern of violent behavior, which was completely false. She said she feared for her children's safety. She played the concerned mother protecting her innocent daughter from a dangerous cousin. 2 weeks after the barbecue, on a Wednesday morning, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find 2 police officers standing there with a juvenile warrant for Olivia's arrest. They were polite but firm. Olivia needed to come with them. I couldn't breathe. I asked what was happening, and they explained that the DA had decided to charge Olivia with assault causing bodily injury. Because of her age, she wouldn't be held, but she needed to be processed and would have a court date. I asked if this was really necessary for a 10-year-old, and they said they didn't make the rules, they just enforced them. Olivia came to the door, confused and terrified. She'd been eating breakfast and still had syrup on her chin. When she saw the police officers, she started crying. One of them, a woman, knelt down and tried to explain gently that Olivia needed to come to the station, that her mom could come too, that everything would be okay. But then Olivia panicked and tried to run back inside. Standard procedure required them to restrain her. They put her in handcuffs, small ones meant for juveniles, but handcuffs nonetheless. My baby, in handcuffs, sobbing and calling for me while I stood there helpless. The worst part? My parents' car was parked across the street. They'd stopped by to drop off some paperwork for me, insurance documents I'd asked about. They'd gotten there just as the police had arrived. My mother stood on the sidewalk, watching her granddaughter being restrained, and did absolutely nothing. My father had his hand on her shoulder, holding her back. When I made eye contact with him, he shook his head slightly, as if warning me not to make a scene. They watched the police put my crying daughter into their car. They watched me beg the officers to let me drive her myself. They watched all of this, and then they got back into their own car and drove away. I followed the police to the station in my own vehicle, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. At the station, they processed Olivia, fingerprints, photos, the whole degrading procedure. James met us there and handled the legal aspects. Because of her age, she was released to me immediately, but she had a court date in 3 weeks. The ride home was silent except for Olivia's quiet crying. When we got inside, she ran to her room and wouldn't come out for hours. I sat outside her door, listening to her sob, feeling more helpless than I'd ever felt in my life. This was worse than losing Patrick, in some ways, because at least that had been an accident, a tragedy, but not a deliberate cruelty. What had happened to Olivia was intentional, calculated, and came from people who were supposed to love her. When she finally emerged, her eyes were swollen and red. She asked me why Madison had lied about her. I had no answer that made sense. How do you explain to a 10-year-old that sometimes people lie because they're angry, or because their parents encourage them to, or because they don't understand the consequences? How do you tell your child that her aunt, her own blood relative, had orchestrated this nightmare? I called my parents that night, furious and heartbroken. My mother answered. Before I could even speak, she said that they'd only stayed out of it because they didn't want to interfere with official police business. I asked how watching their granddaughter get handcuffed was not interfering, and she said they thought it was better to let me handle it as Olivia's mother. This was garbage, and we both knew it. I asked why they hadn't called, why they hadn't come over afterward to check on Olivia, why they were treating their own granddaughter like a criminal. My mother's response changed everything. She said that maybe Olivia had pushed Madison, that children sometimes acted out after losing a parent, that perhaps I'd been too permissive in raising her alone. She suggested that Tessa might have a point about getting Olivia evaluated. I hung up on her. My father called back 10 minutes later. He tried to play peacemaker, saying everyone was upset and not thinking clearly, that family was most important, that we needed to work this out together. I asked him point blank if he believed Olivia had intentionally hurt Madison. He hesitated too long before answering. That hesitation told me everything. Over the next week, James built our defense. He interviewed Qley, who was brave enough to tell the truth despite his mother coaching him otherwise. We learned this later when Qley admitted Tessa had tried to get him to say he'd seen Olivia push Madison. Qley insisted it had been an accident. James also had the playhouse examined. The stairs were steep and narrow, easy to trip on. An accident reconstruction expert stated that the injury pattern was consistent with a fall, not a push. But the damage to Olivia was already done. Kids at school had heard about it, small communities talk, and a 10-year-old getting arrested was big news. Some parents didn't want their children around Olivia anymore. She was excluded from birthday parties, removed from group projects. Her best friend Natalie's mother said it would be better if they didn't see each other for a while. Olivia became withdrawn and anxious, jumping every time the doorbell rang, afraid it would be the police again. My parents called a few more times, but I didn't answer. Tessa sent a single text asking if we were still planning to attend our cousin's wedding that summer. I blocked her number. The preliminary hearing happened in July. Madison had to testify, and she stuck to her story about being deliberately pushed, though she couldn't maintain eye contact and her voice was quiet. Qley testified truthfully about what he'd seen. The expert witnesses presented their findings. James argued that the evidence showed an accident, not an assault, and that prosecuting a 10-year-old for what amounted to rough play was absurd. The judge ultimately dismissed the charges, stating there wasn't sufficient evidence to prove intentional harm beyond a reasonable doubt. He admonished both families to handle such matters privately in the future unless there was clear evidence of criminal behavior. We were free to go. But freedom doesn't erase trauma. Olivia had nightmares for months. She developed anxiety around other children, afraid of being blamed if anyone got hurt near her. She needed therapy twice a week. Her grades dropped. She stopped drawing, which had been her favorite activity. The happy, trusting child I'd raised had been replaced by someone fearful and suspicious. The school called me in September to discuss Olivia's behavioral changes. Her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, sat across from me in a classroom that still smelled like crayons and described how Olivia had become isolated. She no longer volunteered to answer questions. During recess, she stood by herself near the fence instead of playing. When Mrs. Rodriguez had asked if everything was okay at home, Olivia had just shrugged. The therapy sessions were grueling to watch. Olivia's therapist, Dr. Morrison, used play therapy techniques to help her process the trauma. Week after week, I'd sit in the waiting room listening to the muffled sounds of my daughter working through her fear with dolls and drawing exercises. Dr. Morrison told me it would take time, that children are resilient, but that Olivia's sense of safety had been fundamentally shattered. She warned me that trust issues might persist for years. At home, Olivia began exhibiting behaviors I'd never seen before. She checked the locks on all the doors and windows multiple times before bed. She'd ask me repeatedly if I'd done anything wrong, if the police might come back. Once, when a police cruiser drove past our house on routine patrol, she'd hidden in her closet for 2 hours. I found her there, knees pulled to her chest, rocking back and forth. I blamed Tessa, obviously. But I also blamed my parents for their complicity, for choosing to remain neutral when their granddaughter needed them, for giving credence to Tessa's lies. Their silence had been an endorsement of everything that happened. For months, I focused only on helping Olivia heal. We moved to a different school district where no one knew about the arrest. I found her an excellent therapist who specialized in childhood trauma. Slowly, gradually, she started to improve. By Christmas, she was smiling again sometimes. By spring, she'd made a new friend. The new school, Riverside Elementary, was 40 minutes away from our house, but the distance felt necessary. On Olivia's first day, I walked her to the classroom and watched her hesitate at the door. Her new teacher, Mr. Patterson, seemed kind and patient. He introduced Olivia to a girl named Emma who showed her where to put her backpack. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the old Olivia, curious, open, willing to try. Progress came in tiny increments. One day in October, Olivia brought home a drawing she'd made in our class. It was simple, just a house with a tree and a sun, but it was the first time she'd drawn anything in 4 months. I cried when I saw it and hung it on the refrigerator like it was a masterpiece. She rolled her eyes at me but smiled slightly. By November, Emma had become a regular fixture in Olivia's conversation. Emma liked horses and had read all the same books Olivia loved. They'd been partnered for a science project about the water cycle. Emma's mother, Karen, reached out to arrange a playdate, and I found myself explaining, vaguely, that Olivia had been through something difficult and might seem anxious. Karen was understanding without prying. The playdate went well, the girls made friendship bracelets and watched a movie. Olivia came home looking lighter than she had in months. Christmas that year was quiet, just the two of us. I'd bought Olivia an easel and a set of professional colored pencils, hoping to encourage her back toward art. She'd opened the gift with cautious interest and spent Christmas afternoon sketching at the kitchen table while I cooked dinner. She didn't show me what she was drawing, but the fact that she was drawing at all felt like a victory. But while she healed, my anger calcified into something harder and colder. Every night after Olivia went to bed, I'd sit in the dark and think about what my family had taken from her, her innocence, her trust, her childhood joy. They'd stolen months of her life and expected me to forgive and move on for the sake of family harmony. I couldn't. I wouldn't. In January, I started planning. Not revenge, exactly, that word suggests something emotional and uncontrolled. This was more like justice. Carefully researched, meticulously planned justice. The idea came to me during one of Olivia's therapy sessions. I was sitting in Dr. Morrison's waiting room, flipping through a magazine without really reading it, when I overheard 2 other parents talking. One was explaining how her ex-husband had lost his medical license due to an anonymous complaint about improper prescribing practices. The complaint had been legitimate, she said, but she'd been the one who'd filed it after years of him dodging child support. She didn't sound guilty. She sounded satisfied. Something clicked in my mind. My family had faced no real consequences for what they'd done to Olivia. Tessa had filed a false police report, traumatized my daughter, and faced nothing but a dismissed case. My parents had stood by and watched it happen, essentially endorsing Tessa's actions through their silence, and life had continued normally for them. Meanwhile, Olivia was in therapy twice a week, afraid of her own shadow. The unfairness of it burned through me. I started thinking about accountability, real accountability, not just apologies or admissions of wrongdoing that would never come. I thought about how systems work, how institutions have rules and regulations, how people get away with unethical behavior until someone shines a light on it. I spent that night awake, laptop open, researching. I looked into pharmaceutical industry regulations, employment law, medical billing practices, regulatory complaint procedures. I took notes. I made lists. By sunrise, I had the skeleton of a plan. I started with Tessa. Her job in pharmaceutical sales required maintaining relationships with medical practices and hospitals. It also required strict adherence to industry regulations about gifts, incentives, and ethical practices. Over the years, Tessa had bent these rules frequently. I knew this because she'd bragged about it, how she'd take doctors out for expensive dinners, how she'd provide samples well beyond what was appropriate, how she'd make deals that technically violated company policy. I spent weeks gathering evidence. I created a fake email account and contacted some of the doctors and office managers Tessa worked with, posing as someone from her company's compliance department conducting a routine audit. People are surprisingly forthcoming when they think they're required to be. I collected names, dates, amounts, and specifics about every questionable transaction. Then I compiled it all into a detailed, anonymous report and sent it to both Tessa's company headquarters and to the state pharmaceutical board. I included enough specific information that they'd have to investigate, but nothing that could be traced back to me. The investigation took 3 months. During that time, I moved on to my parents. Their dental practices ran smoothly because my mother was meticulous about the business side. But meticulous doesn't always mean correct. I started reviewing everything I knew about their operations, every conversation I'd ever heard over the years about insurance billing, employee classifications, tax deductions. I discovered that they'd been misclassifying some of their dental hygienists as independent contractors rather than employees, a common practice in small businesses but technically illegal when the workers meet certain criteria. These hygienists worked set hours, used my parents' equipment, and were supervised by my parents' dentists. They should have been classified as employees, which would have entitled them to benefits and different tax treatment. I also found that their billing practices for insurance were occasionally questionable, nothing egregiously fraudulent, but some creative coding that maximized reimbursement rates in ways that insurance companies might frown upon if they looked closely. I made detailed reports about both issues. The worker classification information went to the State Labor Board and the IRS. The billing concerns went to the major insurance companies they worked with, along with specific examples from public records and information I'd pieced together from my mother's occasional complaints about payment disputes. By April, the dominoes started falling. Tessa's company suspended her pending the outcome of their investigation. The pharmaceutical board opened their own inquiry. Her dealings were questionable enough that her company decided it was safer to terminate her than to keep fighting. She lost her job in May. Garrett, whose real estate business had been struggling anyway, couldn't handle the loss of Tessa's income. They'd been living beyond their means, and without her salary, they couldn't maintain their lifestyle. They had to sell the house in the gated community and move to a significantly smaller place. Madison had to leave her private school. Tessa tried to get another pharmaceutical job, but the industry is small, and word travels. Nobody wanted to touch someone who had been investigated by the state board. My parents' problems took longer to unfold but were ultimately more devastating. The IRS audit for worker misclassification resulted in substantial back taxes, penalties, and interest. They had to reclassify their hygienists going forward and pay settlements to the previous workers for benefits owed. The insurance company's investigations found enough questionable billing to terminate their contracts with my parents' practices. Losing those major insurance contracts meant losing most of their patients, since people couldn't afford out-of-pocket dental care. Revenue dropped by 70% within 6 months. They tried to renegotiate with the insurance companies, but once you're flagged for billing issues, it's nearly impossible to rebuild that trust. They had to close 2 of their 3 locations and lay off most of their staff. The remaining practice barely broke even. My father, who was 68, had been planning to work another 5 years before retirement. Instead, he was struggling to keep one office open. My mother, who'd built the business side from nothing, watched 30 years of work crumble. They had to dip into retirement savings to cover the penalties and settlements. Their comfortable life became precarious. I watched all of this unfold from a distance, hearing about it through family friends who didn't know I was the one who'd set everything in motion. My Aunt Paula, my mother's sister, would call occasionally with updates, her voice full of concern for my parents' situation. She'd hint that maybe this was the time for family to come together, that my parents could use support. I'd make noncommittal sounds and change the subject. The final piece fell into place in September. Cole, Tessa's son, who'd been brave enough to tell the truth at the hearing, finally broke down and told his father everything. He admitted that his mother had tried to coach him to lie, that Madison had told him privately she'd made up the story about being pushed because she was mad at Olivia for winning their game. Garrett, already strained by the financial and emotional pressure, was apparently furious. He moved out temporarily, and last I heard through the family grapevine, they were in marriage counseling. Paula called me in October. She said my parents wanted to see me, that they wanted to apologize and try to rebuild our relationship. She said they were going through a hard time and that they missed Olivia terribly. She suggested that perhaps Olivia might benefit from having her grandparents back in her life. I asked Paula if my parents knew why all these problems had happened to them. She said they thought it was just bad luck, unfortunate timing, maybe some competitors trying to damage their reputation. I asked if Tessa had any idea what had triggered the investigation into her business practices. Paula said Tessa was convinced a jealous colleague had reported her. Neither they nor Tessa suspected me. It hadn't occurred to any of them that the person they'd wronged might be capable of systematic retaliation. Paula pushed for an answer about meeting with my parents. I told her I'd think about it and call her back. Instead, I wrote a letter. I didn't mail it to my parents directly. I sent copies to each of them, to Tessa, and to several other family members including Paula. I wanted them all to know at the same time, in the same way. The letter was calm and factual. I described watching Olivia get handcuffed while her grandparents stood by silently. I detailed the months of trauma she'd endured because Tessa had lied and my parents had chosen to believe those lies over their own granddaughter's truth. I explained the therapy, the nightmares, the lost friendships, the shattered trust. Then I explained what I'd done and why. I listed each action I'd taken, the reports to Tessa's company, the complaints to regulatory agencies about my parents' business practices. I noted that I hadn't fabricated anything, I'd simply brought truthful information to the attention of appropriate authorities. Everything that happened afterward was the consequence of their own choices and actions catching up with them. I wrote that I'd given them the same mercy they'd shown Olivia, which was to say, none. Just as they'd stood by and watched her suffer for something she didn't do, I'd stood by and watched them suffer for things they actually had done. I considered this proportional justice. The letter ended simply, "You taught me that family means nothing when weighed against convenience and self-interest." I learned the lesson well. Paula called within an hour of the letters being delivered, her voice shaking. She said I'd gone too far, that ruining people's livelihoods was cruel, that I'd hurt innocent people like the employees who'd lost their jobs when the practices closed. I told her those employees had been misclassified and underpaid for years, and that my parents' selfishness had put them in that position, not my honesty about it. I said if she wanted to discuss cruelty, we could talk about what constitutes cruelty toward a 10-year-old child. My mother called next. She was crying, begging me to explain how I could do this to my own parents. I asked her how she could stand on a sidewalk and watch her granddaughter get handcuffed without saying a word. She said they'd been trying to stay neutral, to not make things worse. I told her that neutrality in the face of injustice is itself an injustice, and that she'd chosen Tessa's lie over Olivia's truth. She hung up. My father sent an email. It was long and rambling, alternating between anger and pleading. He said I destroyed his life's work over a misunderstanding, that what happened to Olivia was terrible but that my response was disproportionate, that I'd become vindictive and cruel. He said he barely recognized me anymore. I wrote back, "You didn't recognize your own granddaughter's innocence when it mattered. I don't particularly care if you recognize me now." Tessa's response came through a lawyer, a cease and desist letter threatening to sue me for defamation and tortious interference with her career. James, my attorney, sent back a letter noting that truth is an absolute defense to defamation, and that reporting legitimate regulatory violations to appropriate authorities is protected activity. We never heard from Tessa's lawyer again. The last communication was from Cole. He somehow got my email address, I suspect Paula gave it to him, and sent me a message. He said he was sorry about what had happened to Olivia, that he told the truth at the hearing because it was the right thing to do even though his mom had been mad at him. He said his parents were fighting a lot now and that Madison barely talked anymore because she felt guilty. He asked if Olivia would ever want to see him again because he missed his cousin. That message gutted me in a way nothing else had. Cole was innocent in all of this, as was Madison in her own way. She'd been manipulated by her mother into lying. They were children caught in the damage caused by adult choices. I showed Cole's email to Olivia and asked what she wanted to do. She thought about it for a long time before saying that maybe someday she could see Cole again, but she wasn't ready yet. She said she still had nightmares sometimes about the police coming to the door. I told her that was okay, that she could take all the time she needed, that her feelings were valid. It's been 8 months since I sent the letters. My parents' remaining dental practice is struggling but still open. My father has aged dramatically. Paula sent me a photo from Thanksgiving, and he looks 10 years older than the last time I saw him. My mother apparently had to go on medication for anxiety and depression. Tessa and Garrett are separated but not yet divorced. She's working as a receptionist at a medical office, making a fraction of what she used to earn. They're in significant debt. Madison is in public school now and apparently seeing a therapist to deal with guilt about the lie. Garrett has primary custody of the kids because Tessa's work schedule is more demanding. The family has essentially fractured. Some relatives side with my parents and Tessa, saying I went too far and should have been the bigger person. Others quietly support me, saying that what happened to Olivia was unforgivable and that consequences were deserved. Most family gatherings now happen in separate groups so that people don't have to choose between inviting me or inviting them. Olivia is doing better. She's 12 now, taller, starting middle school. She still sees her therapist monthly, down from the twice-weekly sessions we started with, then weekly, and now just once a month for check-ins. She has a small group of good friends who know nothing about what happened. She's drawing again. She created a beautiful series of watercolors last month that her art teacher wants to submit to a young artists competition. She smiles more. She laughs sometimes. But she's also different in ways that break my heart. She's more guarded now, less trusting. She doesn't assume people will believe her or treat her fairly. When she makes a mistake, even a small one, she becomes anxious that she'll be punished disproportionately. The innocence she had before can never be fully restored. People ask me if I regret what I did. The honest answer is complicated. I don't regret protecting my daughter or holding people accountable for their actions. I don't regret ensuring that those who hurt her faced consequences. What they experienced was the result of their own choices: Tessa's unethical business practices, my parents' improper classifications and billing, their collective decision to prioritize lies over truth. But I do think about the collateral damage. The employees who lost jobs when the practices closed. Madison and Cole, who are dealing with their family's implosion. My father, who worked his whole life to build something that's now crumbling. There's a part of me that aches when I think about that. Then I remember Olivia's face when she saw the police at our door. I remember the sound of her crying while they put handcuffs on her. I remember my parents turning away and driving off without a word. And the ache hardens back into resolve. Someone asked me recently if I thought what I did was right or just. I said I didn't know about right, but it was definitely just. Justice isn't always comfortable. Sometimes it's messy and painful and leaves everyone damaged in different ways. But the alternative, letting those who harm children face no consequences, wasn't something I could live with. Olivia knows the general outline of what I did, though not every specific detail. She asked me once if I'd hurt Grandma and Grandpa on purpose. I told her the truth, that I'd revealed truths they'd been hiding, and that sometimes truth causes pain when people have built their lives on convenient lies. She thought about that and then asked if they'd ever apologized to her. I said I didn't know, but that she didn't need their apology to move forward with her life. The therapy helped tremendously, though the path wasn't linear. For the first year, Olivia saw Dr. Morrison twice a week. By the second year, we'd reduced it to weekly sessions as she showed consistent improvement. Now, she goes monthly for maintenance, and Dr. Morrison says she's made remarkable progress considering the severity of the initial trauma. Last week, Paula called again. She said my mother has been diagnosed with early-stage heart disease, stress-related according to the doctors. She implied that I should feel responsible, that my actions contributed to my mother's health problems. Part of me does feel guilty. I'm not heartless. But the larger part of me remembers that my mother watched her granddaughter suffer and chose to do nothing. Our choices have consequences, sometimes years later, sometimes in ways we don't anticipate. I don't know what the future holds for my relationship with my parents or Tessa. Right now, there is no relationship, and I'm okay with that. Maybe someday, when Olivia is older and more healed, if they've genuinely reckoned with what they did and why it was wrong, we could try to rebuild something. But it would have to be on Olivia's terms, at her pace, if she even wants it at all. For now, we're building our own life separate from them. Olivia and I have created new traditions, new sources of joy and support. She has friends who care about her. She has teachers who believe in her. She has a mother who will burn down anything and anyone that threatens her safety and happiness. Would I do it all again, knowing the full extent of the destruction? If I had to watch Olivia get handcuffed again while my parents stood silently by, while Tessa's lies went unchallenged, while everyone expected me to accept injustice for the sake of family peace? Yes. I would do it all again without hesitation. Because some things matter more than family harmony. Some betrayals can't be forgiven. And some people need to learn that children are not acceptable collateral damage in adult power games. My daughter knows that her mother will always fight for her, no matter the cost. In the end, that's worth more than any relationship I've lost along the way. They chose their path when they chose to hurt my child. I simply made sure that path led exactly where it needed to go.